Hi, everyone. Welcome to the comment section on Hats TV. I'm your host, Shivani Prasad, and I'm so excited to have you here for this episode today with Jacky Doorey. On the comment section, we debunk, explain, review, and answer questions about comments left by people on your favorite social channels: Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Reddit, TikTok, and more. We answer questions like, is this comment true? Should it be making you question your beliefs? Is it something to consider, or is it a game changer? We talk to experts to get you the answers you need. Thanks for joining us today on the comment section. Today's topic is women's sports and fair compensation, and today's guest is Jacky Doorey. She is a multimedia journalist for CBC Sports. So today we're going to talk about this specific video that Jacky and I found. It's on TikTok. We saw it on Instagram. I'm just going to play it right here. So as we know, there is a feature on TikTok where TikTokers can reply to comments with a video. So that's what this person did. Her name is Melissa Ortiz. She is an Olympian and a former pro soccer player. And as you can see in that comment, someone asked her to get back to doing the dishes. That's correct. That happened right here in 2020. So we also found some comments that we want to discuss underneath that video. One of them right here says she might be better, but men are still going to get more of the bag at the end of the day, and that's all that matters. And another one we saw said, oh, sorry, that one's not showing up as good. Let me fix it. Oh, sorry, guys. It's still not showing up well there, but I'll read it to you regardless. It says, the first woman that actually deserves the same pay as men. So there are a few different issues, obviously, with both of these comments. And here to talk to me about them is my friend, Jacky Doorey. Jacky is a Toronto-based host and digital content creator that has worked at CBC Sports for the last 5 years. She started with the CFL and made her way to CBC, where she focuses on Olympic, Paralympic, and Canadian sports stories. Her favorite thing is telling human interest stories through the lens of sport, so she's in the perfect place at CBC. Jacky, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Hi, I'm so excited. On the comment section, I'm psyched. Thank you for having me.
Oh my God, I'm so excited to have you here. You're the perfect person to talk to about this. We have been talking about this for a while. We always look at the Gist Instagram and like send each other things, and we're like, this is crazy that like people are still having these types of discussions, especially considering women in 2020. It's a little insane, but this is something that you do for work and that you cover for work all the time. And so we have a few questions. First of all, we know that these kind of misogynistic comments are not new in the world of women's sports. Not surprising that it's happening in 2020, but still a little crazy to think about. So can you tell us a little bit about what the current situation is with this type of bullying happening to female athletes?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's something female athletes have dealt with from day one. So there's that, which is super unfortunate. But I think actually in the last couple of years, especially with social media, we're seeing a lot of the comments, like our friend with the doing the dishes comment, which like A+ for originality. I've never heard that one before. But like our friends like that are getting called out because the more and more exposure women's sports gets, the more and more their talent is put on display, the more people are able to talk about things that aren't mainstream on social media. So like in this case, NBA, MLB, NHL, all that stuff. The more that people can talk about women's sport, the more it's kind of like, come on, man, like these comments are just so silly. And it actually, I think, helps women's sports in a way because it's kind of like gives people, it brings attention to them in kind of a bit of a negative way, but it allows them to be like, dude, you try kicking this right corner shot. You know what I mean? Like, come on. It's crazy.
Yeah, she is pretty incredible. So let's take a look at those two comments that we found. So the first one, I'm going to try to put it up again. Let's see if it works. I think I should have fixed the timing. Fixed the positioning on it a little bit. But so we'll talk about this one first. The one that says the first woman that actually deserves the same pay as men, and then the other one that says she might be better. So fully acknowledging that she is better. So that she might be better, but it doesn't matter because she won't get paid as much as the men in the same sport. This is something that comes up a lot when we talk about women's sports, right? We are always having this discussion of fair pay. So I know there's been this potential lawsuit with the U.S. women's soccer team. Can you tell me what's going on with it right now? And where are we at with this equal compensation conversation for female athletes?
Honestly, it's such a complicated issue, and there's so many points at play. There's literal facts and there's philosophical things, and it all comes together in this case, the one that you just brought up with the national women's soccer team in the USA. So and I think it's like the best example kind of to look at the men versus women and pay compensation through, because there's not many men's and women's leagues that we can compare as closely as we can with the national US men's team and the national US women's team. We know the women's team has done some incredible things. They're Olympic champions. They've won, multiple World Cups in the past few years. Like, we know that they've been on the radar. I don't think we can say the same thing about the U.S. men's team. So what happened was, about a year in 2019, 28 members of the U.S. women's soccer team filed a gender discrimination lawsuit against USA Soccer. And it got into a lot of things. It got into pay, it got into coaching, it got into the way they're treated medically, it got into how often they play compared to the men's team. So there was a lot of things that they wanted to talk about, but one of them was a grievance under the Equal Pay Act. So what happened is they filed that. A judge took a look at it to see like whether there was any validity in the lawsuit, whether it should be put in front of a jury. And basically, the judge found that, okay, the women's team averages $220,000 of total payments per game in the time period that they were arguing about. The men's team averaged $212,000 in total payments per game. So in his eyes, he's like, well, the women get paid more. Then he took a look at their collective bargaining agreement, which is always a big thing when it comes to women's sports, because when you take a look at CBAs that men's sports have compared to women's sports, it's two completely different ball games. But he takes a look at their collective bargaining agreement, and he's like, a lot of the grievances you're talking about fall under this agreement, and you signed on to it. So it renews in 2021. You're going to have to live with it until then. So what he decided was that the case shouldn't go in front of a jury. So it was a big hit to the women's team, but the update is that they've appealed that. And it's really interesting. To me, this is what I love. Like, it's like taking a look at one piece of information, but we're seeing two different points of view. So we saw what the judge thought, and it's very much what USA Soccer brought up. They're like, look, I'll bring up the receipts. We paid the women more in this time period. Like, you know, how can you talk about an Equal Pay Act when the women are getting paid more? But what the women are saying is like, we never said we didn't get paid more. But what we are saying is, look at how much more we did. Like, when you think about what the women have achieved and the fact that they only get paid like what, $8,000 more on average per game, like, it's kind of crazy. And that's what it comes down to, right? It comes down to like sweat equity. Like, what are they getting paid what they deserve for the amount that they've put out? And another thing they talked about, which I think is a big part of the point as well, it's like, yeah, let's talk about the collective bargaining agreement. We signed it, but just because we signed and got the best agreement we could at the time with the resources we had, doesn't mean that these collective bargaining agreements aren't existing in a system of gender discrimination and gender inequality, right? Like, when a woman goes to the table, she has to fight for things that a man doesn't, and vice versa. A man will have to think of things a woman won't have to as well, I guess. But just with the age of these leagues and how long they've been around and how much more resources are put into men's sports versus women's sports, maybe they have a point. Maybe they're not arguing for these CBAs in the same ballpark that the men are. So I think that's super interesting because, yeah, it comes down to sweat equity versus are women even playing in the same ball field when they're fighting for what they're owed.
Yeah, and it makes you think about, other sports as well, where let's think about it. If we were to think about it from the US soccer perspective, what if the men did win? You're telling me that they would be...
That's a great point. And
that they would be making $8,000. Like, no, like they would probably make a lot more, So I think that women are just saying, like, look at what we've done here, right? And we're not really making that much money, whereas there's so much more always invested in men's sports. And we see that comparison with the NBA as well, right? I think we had talked about that before. Can you tell the viewers a little bit about that?
Well, yeah. And so, I mean, a lot of people this year, especially on Twitter, were looking at Sue Bird versus LeBron James. So both of these are veterans in their league. Sue Bird has played on she's played on Seattle for 17 years. LeBron's been in the NBA for 17 years. Both of them won a title this season in 2020. But a lot of people were looking at and they're like, 17 seasons each, 4 rings each, Bird's salary, $215,000. And that's $215,000, not $250,000. LeBron's salary, we all know, $37 million. And it's not even just that, because then you look at their bonuses. Bird's bonus for the 2020 finals was $11,000 and change. It's $11,300. LeBron's $370,000. So the bonus for winning the final was more than Bird's salary for the entire season. And it's a complicated issue. And I think this is actually what it boils down to is a lot of, oh my gosh, sorry, I have a cat here. Is he making a ton of noise?
No, it's okay.
Okay. No, it's okay. I didn't even, it's like second nature to me, so I don't hear it. But so what it comes down to, it's like they're two different products, right? And a lot of people will say that. They'll say, well, you can't compare what an NBA player gets paid to compared to a WNBA player because they're two different leagues. They've been around for two different periods of time. And obviously the NBA makes a lot of revenue. But I don't think you'll see any WNBA player argue that they should be paid the same as an NBA player. I think what they want is equal compensation relative to revenue. But it also comes down to the fact, why does the NBA have more revenue and get more eyeballs than the WNBA? And that's where it gets philosophical. Like I mentioned earlier, like we can look at the numbers and we can do the math based on relativity. But at the end of the day, I think, and that's where I think society is kind of grappling. That's what we're grappling with now is that, sweat equity is equal. 17 seasons, 4 rings. Sue Bird and LeBron James are two very similar people in their respective leagues and two similar giants. They're GOATs. Like it's unbelievable what both of them have done. And the sweat equity is quite similar. But, the NBA does play more games per season than the WNBA. So like you can see how the layers and the layers keep peeling off and you can look at things literally. But when you think about things philosophically, and why we watch men's sport more than women's sport. Why are there more NBA games this season than WNBA games? Yeah. Why do NBA games get more time on broadcast networks than women's sports? So I think that's the question. And that's where we can start thinking, you know what I mean? Like how much of that comes from what we were exposed to as children? How much of that comes down to when we think of the word sport and pro sport, what does your mind go to? Your mind probably goes to the LeBron Jameses and the, Sidney Crosbys of the world before they go to the Sue Birds and the Natalie Spooners and, the Megan Rapinos of the world. That's
right.
Sport, the associations with sport tend to skew male. And I think that's where we're at right now, where it's like, remember, females are doing these things too.
And they're doing them very well. I mean, I remember we were talking about how broadcasting numbers for female sports have actually gone up since the pandemic. Let's talk about that a little bit. What are the numbers looking like?
Yeah, it's super interesting. And I will preface this by saying it's a strange time. Like, sport has battled in 2020 in so many different ways just to happen at all. So, but it was interesting to see what happened with the WNBA and the NWSL in particular. So the NWSL is the National Women's Soccer League. And they were actually the first North American pro league to have a tournament during the pandemic. So that was massive. But they saw incredible, I think it was like 500% year over year increase, because I think it was CBS who picked them up. So to give that context, there was no Challenge Cup last season. So they could only go up from there. But the fact that they were able to get record-breaking numbers for their finals, I think they averaged 600,000 in their finals, and their semis weren't even on TV. So the marketing wasn't great. Their semis, there wasn't much buildup, but yet they had record-breaking numbers for their final. And the WNBA saw 15% increase from their final from the season before, and that season had been a 14% increase from the final before that. So what's even more interesting about this is that a lot of the other pro sports, NBA, NFL, MLB, have all taken hits in their broadcast numbers for whatever reason. I mean, that's why I tried to preface this with it's such a strange year. People have bigger problems. Pro leagues are having to compete with one another because of scheduling in a way they've never had to before. We're watching hockey in the summer. Like, a lot of things aren't really giving them the chance. But to be honest, a lot of those things are what women's sports deal with on a good year.
Right.
They're always second fiddle to the men's games when it comes to a broadcast schedule. They're always competing with other leagues. They never get the broadcast times that they would want, very rarely anyway. So the fact that women's leagues are showing improvement right now and kind of given a great field to grow in, which they haven't had in previous years, because the men's leagues, steamroll the broadcast schedule, steamroll, where they're put on the website, where people can see them, like their marketing, all of that stuff. The fact that these women's leagues were able to post some numbers show that they have a spot on the broadcast schedule, and given the right ingredients, people will watch. So it's super cool.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So you were also talking about, and I just want to bring this up, this is less about fair compensation and just more about overall awareness about female athletes. You were also talking about when we were sort of discussing and like producing this episode, that we have some of the best women's hockey players in the US and Canada. And I was even telling you how I'm embarrassed because I love hockey and I can't even name those people. And that's a huge problem too. So can we talk a little bit about them? I really just want to shout these people out as much as possible.
Yeah, well, and I mean, when you compare the NWSLs and the pro women's soccer teams and the national women's soccer teams and even the WNBA, like they've done a lot of work. They've been around for quite a long time. And we've seen a growth in those sports that we haven't seen with women's hockey. And it's not for a lack of trying. Like in women's hockey in North America, there is the National Women's Hockey League, the NWHL, which is mostly American. And then, if not largely American, because we also had the Canadian Women's Hockey League. We saw that league fold in 2019. For whatever reason, we could dive into that. That could be actually a whole entire other episode. So yeah, something to think about. But I'm like plugging myself to come and spend more time with you guys. But the CWHL folded. So therefore the pro league that was also already really hard done by for money, for sponsorship, for, getting these women the right conditions to thrive in. Like, a lot of these hockey players had full-time jobs and then would come play their pro hockey league game after work and have to get like a babysitter for their kids. You know what I mean? Like comparing what's happening in the CWHL and NWHL compared to pro men's hockey is completely, I don't even know what the word is. Like, I want to say that's not even like on the same playing field. That doesn't do it justice.
They're not even comparable.
Yeah. So what's happened since then, the CWHL folded. So therefore, all of the amazing women hockey players in Canada no longer have a place to play. And, you know, they're Olympic champions. We all know the amazing Olympic rivalry between USA and Canada when it comes to women's hockey. And they never disappoint every year. It's like always one of the biggest things at the Winter Olympics is that game, or that matchup rather. So what's happened since then is the PWHPA has been formed. And that is the Professional Women's Hockey Players Association. And it's a league, but it's also a players association. So we're seeing like these women fight to create an infrastructure that has legs, you know, and we're seeing a bit of back and forth because obviously like players in the PWHPA don't think that the NWHL league has a system that can work in the future, but then at the same time, they're building their own league. So we're seeing hopefully the early days of a formation of, you know, hopefully one day a solidified league. But it's pretty amazing because what the PWHPA is doing is they have a Dream Gap tour. So what happens is like over 100 players from North America have about, I think it's 5 or 6 tournaments across North America. Mm-hmm. In this season, they had a record-breaking sponsorship with Secret, the deodorant, and they paid, oh my gosh, let me find the number for you, because they're basically keeping the league afloat. They paid over $1 million commitment to the PWHPA, and that's record-breaking. So, and you can see what that does. It basically kept the league alive for another season, and who knows what they'll be able to achieve in another season. And so it just goes to show like what these women are doing to fight for their right to play, but also what can happen when companies like Secret and a lot of other products only exist because of sponsorship dollars. A lot of other leagues only exist, men's leagues included, because of sponsorship dollars. So the fact that there's a company that's willing to bet on women's sport is huge, especially women's hockey. So we'll see where that takes us. It's going to be another amazing year. If you guys have a Dream Gap tour coming to a city where you guys live, I highly suggest you go. It's going to be incredible. And it's Olympic grade sport happening there. Tons of Olympians. If you have a little girl, especially, and a little boy too, because a big part of this is not just showing girls that they have a place at the rink, you know, or wherever on the field or at the arena, wherever you may be. It's to show boys that women are here and girls are here doing it too, you know? And you know, we should be looking at everyone the same way, because I think at the end of the day, and I'm a bit, you know, I'm a bit of a philosopher at this, when it comes to this, but like, it's going to be the next generations who see one another, and who like little boys watching Megan Rapinoe play, watching Sue Bird play, that they're going to be like, oh yeah, like I grew up knowing female athletes. And I think like even you and me, I'm not sure that people in our generation would grow up knowing many.
Right. No, absolutely. I don't think I did. And so speaking of sort of the new generation and the best way for us to support, what would you say is the best way for any of us to be more of an advocate for women's sports, and how can we support women's sports? What are some more like concrete ways we can do that?
Totally. Well, I think first and foremost, some of the easiest ways, like I mentioned before, go to a game. And I mean, whether it's obviously tough right now because sports are taking a bit of a hit and we just have all these new restrictions with COVID, but hopefully within the new year, like, you know, Google and see if there's a women's hockey team, like the Dream Cap Tour stopping in your town. Google to see if there's a beach volleyball tournament happening if you live somewhere hot, or even in the summertime. You know, try and see if there's an NWSL soccer team in your city. WNBA, there's so many amazing athletes and sports events that you can watch. And I think it's super easy. Like I live in Toronto and we'll be like, oh yeah, let's go to a Jays game. And it's like nothing, right? It's almost like, what do you want to do today? Hopefully we're going to get to a point where people are like, oh yeah, like let's head to the NWSL game. We'll have a couple beers. We'll have a great time. You can follow people on, you know, Instagram and social media and support them and engage. You know, obviously we all know that social media engagement with athletes and with teams and leagues is a massive play when it comes to sponsorship these days and monetary support. So you could do that. But I think what it comes down to, and especially with media as well, but for all of us, it's like keep women's sport in the conversation of sport.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And like we heard Natalie Portman say this, and Natalie Portman actually is one of the people to invest in the new NWSL franchise. It's in Los Angeles. So there's going to be a new women's soccer team in LA, which is super exciting. And you know, her alongside, I think, like Serena Williams and like Lily Singh, like there's a ton of really amazing women who put the money into this. So again, we're seeing people bet on women's sport. But what she said, and a big part of why she wanted to back up this NWSL team, is because she saw her son watch the USA women's soccer team in the World Cup, win the World Cup. And she saw the way her son looked at these players. And she was like, she was used to her son watching male athletes do these things. And for her to see the difference it made to have women's sports be available and be celebrated and be easily accessed and consumed, like that will make all the difference in our younger generations. So, I mean, like, you know, go to a game. I would say if you really wanted to level it up, take your niece or nephew to a game. You know, if you have a younger brother or sister, take them to a game. If you have a daughter or son, and it's equally as important for the boys as it is the girls. The boys need to know all of this, like need to know the power of a female athlete just as much as little girls do. Yeah.
I got the images to work. I just want to share them before we leave. So this was one of the ones we were talking about. So the initial comment was get back to cleaning the dishes. And then somebody said she's the first woman that actually deserves the same pay as men, which again is a crazy thing. And then the other comment, which is going to show up, is she might be better than men, but men are still going to get more of the bag at the end of the day. And that's all that matters. So just wanted to put those up because they weren't working properly before. They had a few things in the comments here. Some people were asking if we can see these comments. Yes, we can see them. If anyone wants to comment anything. Somebody is saying, yeah, it's going to take time, like 20 or 30 years. Somebody said equal pay isn't possible, though, in Europe. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if you know about that, Jacky. I don't know anything about that.
Well, I mean, equal pay right now, so this is where it gets into the trickle-down effect. Equal pay won't be possible when you look at it literally, but equality is not the same thing as equity, right? Like the WNBA players will say, we're not asking to get paid the millions that the men's players in the NBA are making, but what we want is the same percentage based on revenue that the men have in their CBAs and their agreements. So about what's happening in Europe, I assume it's a similar thing that's happening in North America, at least when it comes to women's sports. I don't know like the monetary situation over there or how that works. But actually, I do know that a lot of North American or women athletes go play in Europe. Like I know a lot of volleyball players go play in pro leagues in Europe and get paid way more than they get paid here and have opportunities to play there that they don't have to play here. A lot of women basketball players play in Europe. And the funny thing is, it's like we talk about the NBA and men's sports making more money. Well, in Europe, not every women's sport league has a TV deal, yet they still get paid more in Europe than they do in the States. So that's why it comes down to, why do we pay women what we pay? Right. Why do we market women's sports the way we market it? Why do television networks not take on women's sport as a product the way they take on men's sport? And I think that truly it does trickle down, like we mentioned before, to the way that people consume sport. So like I said, we got to start keeping women and women's athletes in the same conversation as we do with the men when we talk about sport, because it's no longer a man's world. Like, not that that sounds a little crazy, because I hate when people say that, because it's not about one or the other. It's about both. And that's what I mean. You know, like remember it was a couple years ago now when a reporter was talking to, what's his name? Sorry, guys, I always do this. Hold on, I'll get it. Thank God for the internet right here. Andy Murray. And he was talking about Andy Murray being the first male to do a certain number of Grand Slams or whatever. And Andy Murray goes, hey, buddy, like Serena Williams has done that.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's what I mean. So that's why it falls on the media. It falls on all of us to really remember sport is male and female. And as we continue on, not just male and female, it's gender nonconforming, like sport.
Everyone. Yeah.
It's for everyone. Right. So, I mean, that's, there's so much to unpack here. But I mean, I think that the comment that you mentioned to begin with is just like, it just goes to show like, that's so archaic at this point. And he's going to get caught out on it, as he obviously did, by a pro player. That's embarrassing.
Exactly. And there's something we saw on the gist that you had actually sent to me last night. Breaking news, FIFA announced that it is to introduce new regulations to protect the rights of female players, including mandatory maternity leave. Let's talk about that a little bit, just really quickly. I know we're getting to time here, but I just want to hear your thoughts about that.
Well, it just goes to show, like, and I mean, again, we're in 2020, but the fact that it's like, oh yeah, we need to make sure that when a female athlete has a baby, that she doesn't get completely screw my French, out of her career. And it's like, yes, you do need to do that. Your product is female athletes. So it's amazing to hear FIFA do that. And I know the WNBA also had a pretty groundbreaking players agreement happen in the last year where, you know, they talked about not only, you know, pregnancy and maternity leave and the medical things that are associated with that, but they talked about like, let's make sure you're put up in a decent hotel room. Like, let's make sure that you're comfortable. Let's make sure that like you play and have enough recovery, like all of those things. So I think I really am loving, because it's like the waves of feminism, right? Like the first wave of feminism were like, we want to be at the table. But then like the third wave of feminism was like, I want to be at the table, but I want to be at the table as a woman. I don't want to be at the table pretending like we're equal, like we're different, but let's celebrate those differences. And let's start making, you know, players agreements that include maternity leave and include what it includes points that cover what it means to be a female. So I think that's great.
Yeah. Also, someone in the comments says Katie Taylor is a women's lightweight champion boxing. She deserves a mention. She absolutely does. We definitely want to talk about all these amazing female athletes.
Oh my gosh. And I mean, like, if I can, like, Canada's team has so many amazing female world champions going into Tokyo 2020, guys, like Melissa Human-Paredes and Sarah Pavin. They're world champions. They might win Canada's first ever Olympic gold medal in beach volleyball. And beach volleyball is so much fun. One of the best sports to watch at a Summer Olympics. And they play all over the place. If you're in California, like they're there all the time. They play in Toronto. They play in Europe, all over the place. We have canoeists like Laurence Lepointe. She is like, I think she's a 13-time world champion, actually. So it's super incredible. There's so many female world champions in Canada right now, especially in Olympic sport, that are like going to do so many big things in Tokyo. So definitely take the time to Google some of them, like just Team Canada athletes in general, because there's a lot of pretty amazing groundbreaking stuff happening.
I'm so happy to talk about Canadian stuff because my show usually is pretty political and we're always talking about American stuff. So very, very happy to talk about Canadian stuff. I also want to just mention something else that's happening in our comment section. I know the show's called the comment section, but we also have a comment section. Literally somebody just commented, "This is silly." So it's literally happening right now as we talk about it. It's literally happening as we're talking about it. So this is why we want to keep having these conversations. I know you mentioned it and I would love to have you back on. I'm sure we're going to have so many things to talk about. But I thank you so much for coming on the show. I know that right now Toronto is entering, on Monday, Toronto will be entering another lockdown. So I wish you lots of health and safety at this time. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Shivani. That was so much fun. And thank you everyone for your comments. Even if they're not nice, that's okay. Everyone's opinion matters. And that's exactly what your show is here for, to talk about it. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, anytime. I would love to have you again sometime.
Oh, I'll be back. Don't you worry. I'll find you.
Don't forget to catch Jacky on CBC Sports. You can follow her. I'm going to put her Instagram and Twitter handle up here. It's just at Jacky Doorey. Please don't forget to follow her. She does amazing reporting on sports in general, but also, of course, as we're talking about women's sports, we want to make sure that we keep that in mind. Thank you so much, Jacky. And don't forget, you can always send in any comments that you want to discuss on the show by DMing me on any platform. My Instagram is at LivShiv, LIVESHIV, and that's my Twitter handle as well. The comment section is live every Saturday at 10 a.m. right here on Haps TV. Thanks for joining us from Richmond Hill, Ontario. I'm Shivani Prasad. Cool.
Are we off?
Yes, we're off. All done.